South Korea and Japan believe their state summit has opened a new chapter in bilateral ties. Security and economic partnerships have been normalized, and summit-level diplomacy is set to resume. On President Yoon's second day in Tokyo, a meeting with members of Japanese political and business circles, and speaking at a local university to promote further exchanges. The European Central Bank raises key interest rates by 50 basis points despite fears of widening banking crisis. Good afternoon. We begin in Tokyo, where President Yoon Suk-yeol has begun the second day of his visit to Japan on Friday, following a face-to-face with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida yesterday. It's looking like a busy day for President Yoon before he returns home later today. For more, our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon joins us from Tokyo. Do-yeon, walk us through Yoon's schedule for today.
Well, Kyung-eun, good afternoon from here in Ginza Station in Tokyo. And as you mentioned, President Yoon has started his second and last day of the trip to Japan. Just moments ago, he wrapped up a meeting with the leadership of Japan's largest opposition party, and that's called the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan. This was not planned. And according to an official from the presidential office, it was requested by the party, which wanted to show that even the opposition is fully supportive of efforts by the two countries to improve bilateral ties. Now, before that, he met with cross-border cooperation organizations, including lawmaker groups from South Korea and Japan, as well as a South Korea-Japan Cooperation Committee. For the rest of the day, he will be meeting with business leaders, as was already announced by the presidential office prior to the visit.
So we understand President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida had an honest and direct conversation as they dined in a rather comfortable and personal setting after the summit. What can you tell us about their apparently candid conversation?
Yeah, that's right, Kyung-eun. The two leaders meeting in a fairly relaxed environment has been the talk of the town, as they went to two different venues for some meals and some drinks. Now, the dinner was not open to the media, but for the two to have a conversation in a comfortable setting. From what we can gather from those who are familiar with what went down, President Yoon has shown his will to improve ties with Japan during his term. Prime Minister Kishida apparently replied that with Yoon's honest efforts, he expects good results. At the second venue, they apparently talked over some beer and tried soju, a Korean traditional liquor, and Japanese soju as well. The two wrapped up with Kishida expressing his hopes for a similar meetup when he visits South Korea in return.
Right. Let's also talk about First Lady Kim Jong-un. She was with Yoon for some of the events there. What do we know about her meeting with her counterpart, Yoon-Kishida?
Right. The First Lady was there during the meal session along with her with Japanese Prime Minister's wife, Yoon-Kishida. But that was not the first time they had actually met during this trip. The two, while the summit was going on, had a baking session together at the Prime Minister's residence. According to presidential spokesperson Lee Do-eun, Yoon-Kishida talked about her hometown, Hiroshima, while they made traditional Japanese sweets and drank matcha together. Now, South Korean First Lady showed her appreciation for Kishida's hospitality by gifting her Korean traditional sweets and shared her hopes for closer exchanges between people from both countries. The two also reportedly talked about their shared love of art. This was the second time they met, actually, the first time being 4 months ago during the G20 summit in Indonesia. That's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more in a later newscast. Back to you, Kyung-eun.
Thank you, Do-yeon, for the reporting. And now, on his first day in Tokyo, President Yoon Suk-yeol held his face-to-face meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The leaders believe the summit marks the opening of a new chapter in bilateral ties as they decided to normalize security and economic relations that have been frayed in recent years. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young has more on the summit outcome.
South Korea and Japan took major steps on Thursday to normalise their relations in security and trade and move towards a partnership that looks to the future.
한국과 일본은 자유, 인권, 법치의 보편적 가치를 공유하고 안보, 경제, 글로벌 어젠다에서 공동의 이익을 추구하는 가장 가까운 이웃이자 협력해야 할 파트너입니다.
In the joint press conference after their summit, President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said Japan that day had ended its 2019 export curbs on 3 key materials used in South Korea's major tech products. Yoon said Seoul had also dropped its complaint against Tokyo's export policy to the World Trade Organization. The two neighbours' relations hit a critical low some 4 years ago over unresolved disputes and sentiments over historical issues, primarily the issue of compensating Koreans who were subjected to forced labour by Japanese firms before and during World War II.
Under the strong leadership of President Yoon, I am aware measures were announced to pay the settlements through a Korean foundation. With the implementation of the measures, I expect bilateral ties will progress more vigorously in a wide range of fields such as politics, the economy and culture.
To close the book on their trade war, the two sides will continue to hold talks to reinstate each other as trusted trade partners on their respective whitelists. On that note, they have also agreed to revive defence dialogues and establish economic security talks between Seoul and Tokyo, as well as seek trilateral dialogue with China. Another key move was fully restoring the bilateral military intel sharing pact, considered vital in joint efforts to counter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. This comes as Seoul and Tokyo move to bolster their cooperation with Washington to deter Pyongyang and address growing regional and economic challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. The Yoon-Kishida summit is seen as a key stepping stone to such efforts, overcoming historical sticking points by building mutual trust, creating the base for greater governmental, business and civilian exchanges. Building on their breakthrough summit on Thursday, both Yoon and Kishida expressed their willingness to engage in active diplomacy, meeting whenever necessary without being constrained by formalities. Oh-Seong, Arirang News, Tokyo.
Foreign media were quick to report on the Seoul-Tokyo summit. Some see it as a milestone to mend frosty ties against the backdrop of increasing threats from North Korea and China, where others were skeptical of the results. Lee Dae-yeon has more.
Following the South Korea-Japan summit, news outlets across the globe assessed South Korea and Japan as having opened up a new chapter in bilateral relations amid regional threats from North Korea and China. After the summit, Reuters reported that the remarks from the leaders of the two countries show how North Korea's missile launches and China's expanding engagement globally have contributed to the two countries mending ties. Germany's DPA also attributed cooperation between the two countries as coming as a result of the challenges posed by North Korea and China. France's international news agency AFP provided a recap of past disputes between South Korea and Japan, while also mentioning how President Yoon Suk-yeol has been working to overcome a century of difficult history and respond to regional crises by cooperating with Japan. It also reported the U.S. appears to have worked intensively to ensure the summit took place, adding that Washington welcomes better South Korea-Japan ties as feuding over historical issues has undermined the U.S. push to reinforce its alliances in Asia. That was also mentioned by some other media outlets in the U.S., which assessed the summit as strengthening trilateral ties between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The New York Times highlighted the importance of security ties between Seoul and Tokyo as it says that China's rising ambitions threaten to alter the balance of power in Asia. According to the Washington Post, all eyes are fixed on whether or not disputes arising from the Japanese colonization of the Korean peninsula during World War II can be resolved. Meanwhile, Japanese media welcomed President Yoon's visit to Japan. NHK provided some biographical information on Yoon while also reporting the popularity of the Japanese animated movie Slam Dunk and the Japanese whiskey highball boom in South Korea. The Yomiuri Shimbun had a similar tone, with the meeting among its top stories where it called the first summit in Japan between South Korean and Japanese leaders in 12 years an effort to roll out proactive economic cooperation. On the other hand, Chinese outlets were more skeptical about the potential results. Citing an expert, the state-run newspaper Global Times said it would be difficult to thaw icy bilateral ties between Seoul and Tokyo and that hostility between the two countries may even grow. It also pointed the finger at Washington, adding that President Yoon should be aware of satisfying the needs of the U.S. and Japan. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
The European Central Bank goes ahead with raising its key interest rate by 0.5 percentage points, despite mounting uncertainties over the recent banking crisis. Meanwhile, the U.S. tries to calm fears among the public, saying the American banking system is safe and sound. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Despite expectations that the European Central Bank would take a smaller step when raising its key interest rates due to the uncertainty surrounding Credit Suisse and the fallout from bank failures in the U.S., it announced Thursday that it would still be making a big step of 50 basis points. The decision comes as ECB President Christine Lagarde stressed the need to continue to fight inflation in the Eurozone.
Inflation is projected to remain too high for too long. Therefore, the Governing Council today decided to increase the three key ECB interest rates by 50 basis points, in line with our determination to ensure the timely return of inflation to our 2% medium-term target.
The move by the ECB, which has been raising its rates at the fastest pace on record, will now see the 20 countries in the Eurozone raise their main lending rates to 3.5%. Meanwhile, speaking to the Senate Finance Committee on Thursday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the nation's banking system remains sound and Americans can feel confident about their deposits.
I can reassure the members of the committee that our banking system is sound and that Americans can feel confident that their deposits will be there when they need them. This week's actions demonstrate our resolute commitment to ensure that our financial system remains strong and that depositors' savings remain safe.
Her latest remarks come amid the recent collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in California and Signature Bank in New York. Yellen also stressed that taxpayers will not bear the cost of protecting uninsured money at the two failed regional banks. Meanwhile, Credit Suisse shares rebounded sharply on Thursday after announcing that it would borrow up to $54 billion from its central bank. Concerns had escalated after the Swiss lending bank's stock prices began plunging on Wednesday, prompting stock markets to fall in the U.S. and around the world. And now, San Francisco-based First Republic Bank is set to receive a $30 billion loan from a group of America's largest banks. The U.S. Treasury Department raised the support from the larger banks, saying it shows the resilience of the banking system. Trading of First Republic Bank stocks, which was halted several times on Thursday due to volatility, ended the day up more than 10% on the news of the $30 billion worth of assistance. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Wall Street stocks rallied on Thursday after 11 major U.S. banks offered a lifeline to First Republic Bank. The group of major banks, including Bank of America and Wells Fargo, announced they will deposit a combined $30 billion into the First Republic Bank to reflect their confidence in the banking system. Investors had feared the San Francisco-based institution would be the next bank to fail following the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. First Republic Bank's share price rose 10% on Thursday after slumping as much as 36% earlier in the day. The S&P 500 jumped 1.8% on Thursday for its best day in nearly 2 months. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 1.2%, while the Nasdaq Composite jumped 2.5%. South Korea's Trade Ministry says the EU's latest Trade and Industry Acts do not contain any discriminatory measures, unlike the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. The announcement comes after the European Commission unveiled its new plans on Critical Raw Materials Act and Net Zero Industry on Thursday. The Critical Raw Materials Act seeks to limit imports of any key raw material from a single third country to 65%. The Net Zero Industry Act sets a goal of producing at least 40% of clean technologies within the EU by 2030. The Trade Ministry believes these acts won't be discriminatory like the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which provides subsidies to electric vehicles only produced in North America. Now on to a grim assessment of the domestic economy. The latest data shows the economic slowdown in South Korea continues for a second month in a row amid global economic uncertainties and slumping exports. Our Moon Ae-ryeon has the details.
February saw stunted growth in the job market as well as a decline in exports. According to the latest economic trends report released by the Ministry of Economy and Finance on Friday, monetary tightening across the globe as well as the war in Ukraine has continued to affect the country's economy. Exports fell by 7.5% compared to the previous February. This was attributed to the continued decline in tech exports, falling by 32% on year. Washington's efforts to curb chip exports to China were reflected in the sharp decline in semiconductor shipments, which fell by more than 40%. The country's job market, which has seen continued on-year growth since last year after the easing of some COVID-19 restrictions and the creation of non-contact jobs, notably slowed its pace in on-year growth last month. There were some 310,000 more people in employment this February than in the previous February, but this on-year increase is smaller than in January, when there were 410,000 more people in work than the year before. Despite the continued increase in on-year employment rates, the wholesale and retail sector has seen on-year declines every month since May last year. Last month, the wholesale and retail industry had 76,000 fewer employees than in February last year. Finance authorities also projected a slowdown in inflation, with prices beginning to stabilize for petroleum products and fresh produce, particularly the prices of beef and pork. Consumer prices showed a 4.8% increase on year, but this is 0.4 percentage points less than the increase reported in January. This is also the lowest increase on year since April 2022. However, retail sales, a barometer of private spending, fell by 2.1% on year in January due to weakened domestic demand across all sectors. With the economic slowdown, the Finance Ministry reported that it will concentrate its efforts in increasing exports, improving energy efficiency, and stabilizing consumer prices. 문혜련, Arirang News.
More details are out on North Korea's launch on Thursday of an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's widely presumed Thursday's launch was a Hwasong-17 ICBM, the regime's largest nuclear-capable missile to date. The regime's state media reported Friday that the leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the test firing and expressed great satisfaction. There he called for enhancing deterrence against nuclear war and giving a sense of fear to the North's enemies. Pyongyang's series of missile provocations this week is widely seen as a show of unhappiness against Seoul's trilateral security cooperation with the U.S. and Japan coming on the day of Seoul-Tokyo summit. Pyongyang said on Thursday the ICBM launch was a response to the quote threat from the ongoing Seoul-Washington joint drills. The U.S. military has released video footage of a Russian fighter jet downing an American drone over Black Sea, saying it absolutely confirms there was a collision, which Moscow has denied. The newly declassified footage by the U.S. European Command on Thursday depicts mid-air encounter that lasted between 30 and 40 minutes. There, a Russian fighter jet dumps fuel as it intercepts a U.S. drone before it apparently collides with the MQ-9 Reaper drone. Despite releasing the video, the Biden administration says it will not take any action against Russia. This, according to a Pentagon spokesperson, is an effort to de-escalate tensions after Moscow said bilateral relations are at their lowest point.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Poland has become the first NATO member to pledge to send some of its fighter jets to Ukraine. Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, Polish President Andrzej Duda promised to send Soviet-era MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine to assist in its defense against Russia. The leader said that Poland will send 4 aircraft in the next few days, with more to follow after they undergo maintenance. However, the total number of aircraft being supplied is not yet known. Poland's move comes after repeated requests for fighter jets from Kyiv and marks a breakaway from the stance taken by other NATO members not to supply warplanes. Several NATO allies have already promised to send tanks to the war-torn country. We turn our attention to France now, as its government has pushed through a controversial pension reform. French President Emmanuel Macron on Thursday ordered his prime minister to invoke special constitutional powers to pass the reform without a parliamentary vote. The proposal was cleared earlier in the day in the French Senate and was set to be voted on in the National Assembly, where it was not expected to pass, prompting the intervention from Macron. The pension reform will raise France's retirement age from 62 to 64, starting in 2027. The government says the measure is needed to address a pension funding deficit. Following the move, police clashed with protesters in Paris with tear gas used to disperse crowds in the Place de la Concorde. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom has banned TikTok from government-issued devices over security concerns. Announced by the British government on Thursday local time, the ban took place with immediate effect. The move follows similar bans by the United States, the European Union, and Canada. These bans come as TikTok has faced increasing scrutiny over allegations that it collects users' private data for use by the Chinese government. TikTok has denied sharing information with Chinese officials. Meanwhile, a report from the Wall Street Journal claims a U.S. committee has threatened a potential nationwide ban of the app unless Chinese owners sell their stakes in the company. The White House has not confirmed or denied the report. And finally, Saudi Arabia's inaugural Camel Cup comes to a close on Friday, with its winner expected to walk away with a grand prize of $21 million. Taking place in the kingdom's oasis city of Al Ula, the 4-day camel racing event kicked off on Tuesday. Races have been taking place every day from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. in a bid to avoid the desert heat. Organized by the Saudi Camel Racing Federation, the event has drawn in teams of racers and camel breeders from around the world. Apart from races, those attending the Camel Cup can also experience cultural events and exhibitions that detail the sport's history in the region. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. A dry air advisory has been expanded to more regions now, pretty much everywhere, except on Jeju and the south coast, where rain is expected today. Also, the Korea Forest Service has raised its wildfire warning to the second highest level. Please be careful with anything that could cause a spark, and remember, 1/3 of wildfires are caused by hikers. And here are some ways to boost indoor humidity, as the level is as low as 20% these days. The ideal humidity level is 40 to 60% around this time. Well, there was a chill in the air this morning again, but highs are rising fast, jumping more than 10 degrees from a chilly morning, leading to wide temperature differences today again. Now, southern parts of the country are having lower daytime highs than Thursday, and air quality remains good with cloudier skies in the afternoon. Rain on Jeju and the south coast continues through tomorrow, and the rest of the country remains dry with more up and down temperatures. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.